Hello, everybody. This is Paul Carruthers, and I'm joined as always by Sean Bice. And this is our weekly podcast, Off Track with Carruthers and Bice, where we talk about all things MotoAmerica. And we're going to be talking a little bit more than MotoAmerica today, as we're going to be talking about MotoGP and the World Championships, Moto2. Obviously, we all know Cameron Beaubier is there. Joe Roberts is there. We've got Garrett Gerloff representing us in World Superbike. And the gentleman that we're going to talk to here in a few minutes is familiar with all of them. As I'm going to find out exactly who he works for, because I thought it was Dorna, but I might be wrong. But anyway, Sean, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm down in Florida. Took the trip down here to visit my mother-in-law, and so we're down here, and we were looking forward to some tropical sunshine. It's 65 and overcast today. I mean, I'll take it. It's still, I'm not wearing a jacket or anything, but yeah, I'm good. It taking that trip down to, we drove, and it's kind of like when we drove to, well, I've driven to Atlanta, I've driven to Barber this past year. So it's funny, a lot of the same route is that way. So I felt like I was going to a race in the middle of the winter here. So, but anyway, it's good to be down here.
Well, didn't you go to Florida just to make yourself feel young?
Exactly. That's right. No, it's totally that way. Plus, I figured I'd somehow end up in the news. Seems like anything and everything that's weird happens in Florida, right?
I think full credit to you for braving the elements of going there. But yeah, someone told me you went there because it puts you in a different age sphere a little bit there, and it makes you feel young.
Yeah, it's the fountain of youth down here for me. When all the other blue hairs are here, I mean, I'm feeling pretty good. So not bad.
Well, speaking of youth,
yes,
our guest today is I like this kid, and I don't really know him, and I call him a kid because he's a British lad, and I don't know how old he is, but he'll tell us. But he's young, and he's got a cool job. I guess his bio reads that he's obviously a commentator and a social media producer. I got to find out if he actually does that for Dorna, if he does that for an outside company that's contracted to Dorna, but we'll find that out. I like to think of him as he's really my voice of Friday mornings. Ever since Joe Roberts and Cameron Beaubier, got started over there in Moto2, I admit to getting up really, really early, and I watch the live feed, and I have live timing on one screen, and I'm looking at their lap splits, and I'm agonizing with how difficult Moto2 is. And I'm one of those people that I always knew it was difficult, but this year has really given me a different idea of how difficult it is, because obviously we sent Cameron Beaubier over there. He's our 5-time Superbike champion, and we all know how good he is. And then he gets over there, and it's a bit of a struggle. And Matt's eerily, or let me tell you, our guest today is Matt Dunn, and he's all those things that I just mentioned. But he does the commentating for basically what is MotoGP's live feed worldwide. It's a subscription service, which is the best $100 and whatever dollars you'll ever spend, because it keeps you on top of all the things that are going on over there all the time. So he basically gets paid to talk a lot. Like, I always think of he's almost like the younger British version of Sean Bice. I mean, Sean's the only other person that I know that could probably talk the entire day. I just don't know how well informed he'd be about all the subjects that he talked about, but it wouldn't stop him.
No, it wouldn't.
So this kid makes his living by telling us what's going on the racetrack, and it's turned out that he's kind of become a fan of our podcast, and he uses some of the information that we were able to get from our guests, especially when we talk to the Camerons and the Joes and the Garretts of the world. But let's bring him in and have a bit of a chat with him. So Matt, how are you? I guess it's this evening in good old England.
Yeah, it is. Well, good evening. Thanks so much for having me. Really, I mean, for long time listener, first time caller, as I said to you guys, and thanks for the nice intro. I really appreciate that. I think you and my mum must be like the nicest people when talking about my commentary compared to everybody else.
Your mom's probably younger than me, though.
Actually, no, I think she's a little bit older than you, actually.
Oh, yeah?
But I'm okay. So, like, to clarify, then I'm 28. I'm 27 years old. I'm 28 next year in March. So, well, I think by the time we go to Qatar, yeah, I'll be 28.
I think it's the fact that you don't shave and you got that baby face. I thought you were probably 17 or 18.
Hey, I shave, but only once a week. So no, it's yeah. No, I appreciate I'm quite young. I think it gives me a bit of it's useful when it comes to working in the paddock, because I think it disarms people quite a bit, because they just look like, oh, what's it? Oh, I'm not gonna tell this nice little kid to go away. I can't do that. He's like a puppy dog. So I use it to my advantage sometimes, you know.
Yeah, you can't tell a young kid to piss off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And also,
well,
I mean,
some people do.
It's also good that it's such a young sport, and I like to think of myself as a lot younger than what I am, and I give a lot of credit to that, to being involved in a sport where the participants are all young. So you kind of you sort of meet somewhere in the middle as far as how you interact with them and stuff. So yeah, I think you're in a good spot, and man, it's hard for me to not think you're probably just living the dream. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I know, absolutely. It's been I mean, I won't lie, like the last 2 years have been pretty full on, like very non-stop. By the end of the season, when it finishes, I'm very, very tired. Like the last actual week, and it's not obviously the COVID and things like that, but I've had a pretty sore throat. So I was actually kind of wondering, like, oh God. So
Right.
because you mentioned like, oh, do you want to come on the podcast? And it's pretty tiring, but it is obviously when you're doing it and you're talking to you guys, be a bit of an opportunity to look back on the season. I'm like, wow, yes, yeah, absolutely, living the dream, absolutely, no question about it.
Now let's back up a little bit and talk about you before we get into talking about Moto2, et cetera. But
Sure.
do you work for Dorna, or is it another company that's contracted to Dorna?
So I actually technically work for myself in my own media company, First and Throttle Media. It's what I had to do in order to come and live in England and still work for Dorna. I was previously an employee of theirs living in Spain, but due to the pandemic, family factors, and got another half as well who I've been with for a few years, I wanted to move back to the UK. So in order to continue working, I had to embrace the freelance life. So I work my company, First and Throttle Media, like I'm contracted to Dorna to carry out commentary services and social media production services. Basically, I'm essentially doing the same that I was last year, but just as a freelancer now.
I first learned about you, I think, was right in the lockdown part of COVID, when you were doing interviews and stuff on Zoom or Skype or whatever it was. That's where I first got my indoctrination into Matt Dunn. So.
And was that because you were thinking, who the hell is this idiot they've got on their Instagram stories?
Well, yeah, I was thinking, how freaking bored must I be to be watching this?
Yeah, well, everybody was, right? That's why actually they did kind of good on the views and things like that. And
yeah, it's a captive audience, right?
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what's really funny? Full circle. Obviously, we're not doing this on video, so like you said in the WhatsApp messages, no one's probably wearing trousers or pants, as you guys call them, right? But in this very room that I'm in right now, is the spare bedroom in my other half's father's house in the northeast of England, and this is the same room, same seat, and everything that I did all these podcasts and all these Instagram stories, Instagram live interviews with riders from in that lockdown. This is where I spent it for 4 months. So yeah, it's kind of full circle, and that's where this where we are now, just outside of Durham in the UK. It's an old train line which has sort of been gravelled over. That's part of the coast to coast route in the UK. I was doing like runs up and down there, trying to keep a bit of fit, trying to keep that lockdown weight off. And that's where I was listening to you guys' podcast, keeping me sane. Ben Bostrom, Cam Beaubier, Joe Roberts in it. It was great. So I thank you for the entertainment and keeping me, well, sane, basically, whilst we were locked up.
Well, what a small world it is. And Sean, another cool thing about Matt, I feel like I'm the president of his fan club already, and it's kind of creepy. But anyway, no, I'm always interested by youth that has a feel for history of their sport, especially when they work in the sport. It's all too common to talk to a young racer these days that don't know, anything from 5 or 10 years earlier than when they started. So Matt's got a pretty good feel of what's going on and the history of the sport. So I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, Matt, I've got a question for you related to that,
Go on.
actually. So Paul and I, of course, and it sounds like you've got the depth of knowledge to understand about the transition from Grand Prix or GP to MotoGP. So it used to be you talk about Grand Prix and you'd go, 125, 250, 500 or whatever. Well, now that MotoGP is a branded thing specific to that class, it's kind of weird when you talk about like all of that kind of racing, prototype racing, I guess. When you talk about MotoGP, it doesn't sort of encompass Moto2. It's weird how they're branded separately. How do you deal with that when you're not really speaking? I guess you talk about the GP paddock, but does that encompass the other classes as well in your mind?
Yeah, it does in a way, because like obviously, you find yourself in some social situations outside of work, like you're getting your haircut and they're asking like, well, what do you do for a living?
Right.
And only recently have I started saying these, oh, I'm a motorsport commentator. And then the inevitable questions come, what do you commentate on? And I say, like, I end up saying motorcycle racing. They're like, oh, is that like that MotoGP thing? And I go, well, no, it's Moto2, Moto3, and they're kind of the same, but one's a junior class and one's like the feeder series for it. I guess, like, to the uninitiated, I guess, and even in some respects the initiated, to refer to them sort of as like the main feeder series for MotoGP, I guess is the main way to referring to them, right?
Yeah, it seems like that's the way to do it. I mean, I do it that way in my head, but it's weird how you have to kind of specify a little bit now.
Yeah.
Especially the way they've trademarked the names, like, brand names essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And like it's so different to what it was like back in the past. I mean, like I try and be a bit of a student of the sport. I'm a bit disappointed sometimes in some of my historical knowledge. I love hanging around with Matt Burt, one of the main MotoGP commentators, and also we sit near the likes of Matt Oxley, journalist in the media center, and those guys. I mean, just the stories they have of the history and stuff. I love listening to it, and I always feel a little bit disappointed in myself that I don't know that kind of stuff already. And then that's why I like listening to you guys, because you get all sorts of guests on, past and present. But back in the day, like it has changed, because I feel previously the 125 series and then the 250 series decades ago, it could have been a championship in its own right, where you had guys who were he was a great 250 rider. He was the 250 god. But now Moto2 and Moto3, they are just about everybody in there wants to get to MotoGP, and that's it. Nobody in there, apart from maybe a couple who have had a shot at MotoGP and then moved back to Moto2, or diagonally, I would say, to Moto2, because it's not, like, in some respects, it's not kind of fair to say a complete step down into respect to some riders' careers. How many riders do you see these days who are making a career out of being a Moto3 or a Moto2 rider? The ambition is just MotoGP, and I think that's kind of a big distinction for me, and what I've read about previously. But what does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah,
very much so.
It totally does. I mean, it's funny. You think about, I mean, I can name specific 250 riders, obviously Carlos Carduce and guys like that. But even Loris Reggiani back in the day in 125s, you would think of guys, you didn't, I mean, I guess they could have advanced or whatever. And maybe some of them did, but some of them made their hay or made the sunshine when they were in those lower classes. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you don't think of guys as being specialists like this. Everybody's waiting on the doorstep to go into the big class. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think of guys like, for example, like in recent years, Angel Nieto. He died a few years ago now, obviously, and he's one of the greatest ever in terms of his championship wins, but not Premier class, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, consider yourself lucky, though, that you can go get a haircut and somebody knows who MotoGP is.
It's quite rare.
Because I guarantee when Sean and I go to the barber, the guy's like, oh, what are you doing? We tell him, and he's like, is that where they drag their knee on the pavement? And we're like, yeah. And it's like, it's super bikes. And, we have a lot more explaining to do than you do, just telling them it's Moto2 and Moto3 instead of MotoGP. But
to be fair, where I live is I actually live in Motorsport Valley. I live a half an hour. I know you're a big cycling guy, Paul. So I live like an hour's cycle away from Silverstone Circuit.
Oh, awesome.
My other half, she works for a motorsport agency, does a lot of work in F1. And so she sort of, because of that, having working in an office there, she decides where we live. I'm freelance, so it's awesome. But we're right in the heart of Motorsport Valley, so Bicester city centre where I live. Well, you guys would probably call it Bicester because that's how it's kind of spelt. It's weird, British pronunciations. Don't get me started.
Well, Matt, I got to interrupt you for a minute because that was a question that I had with the last name of Bice. I mean, when I was in high school, they used to call me Bicester and they would spell it that way.
Really? Okay, well, there you go.
It probably was Bicester. So, but my name is some kind of, it relates to trees or something. It's not that, but what is Bicester? Does it mean like two things actually, or?
I haven't a clue, but it's around there. It's rife because you got right just outside Silverstone, you've got Toaster, but it's spelled Towcester. And then of course you got Leicester and all that too. So it's I don't know, but there was a joke the other day. I don't know, maybe this isn't going to be very good for an audio podcast, but I saw a tweet the other day talking about like British people would spell booster, like your booster COVID shot, as you would spell it like BOW Cester, like toaster. So I was like, because that's the kind of nature of spelling we have in here. It's a bit silly, but yeah. But I live in a very cool place. It's right at the heart of Motorsport Valley. So I literally walk to the supermarket and there are Formula One jackets, British Superbike jackets, and hats. No, in England there's a funny cultural phenomenon thing. So obviously, maybe you guys aren't, and MotoAmerica fans aren't so big up on British Superbike history, but they'll know obviously John Hopkins rode for Rizzler Suzuki back in the day, right? And then of course you have Monster Tech from Yamaha. For some reason, I think it's to do with the distributor that they had at like the British Grand Prix and also British Superbike races up in that period, the mid 2000s. You will see, I guarantee you, wherever you go in the UK, any city, any town, you go out shopping for a restaurant, you will see either a Rizzler Suzuki hat or fleece or jacket, or you'll see a Monster Yamaha Tech 3 jacket, fleece, hat. Wow. Everywhere. I'm not even joking. That is a thing in England. And now I've said it, everybody listening, if they're British or they come here, they will notice it, I guarantee you.
Well, that Rizzler had that baby blue that was kind of cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a nice looking, it'd be a nice looking jacket, whether or not they exist or not anymore, you know? So let's go with that. Yeah. And then I want to back up a little bit. You said something about your partner. I saw her tagged on one of your Instagram pages, so I clicked on her name and went to her page, kind of stalkish a little bit, which I don't feel real good about. But I want to tell you that you're 100% boxing above your weight.
Oh no! Wow. No. Thank you very much. Yeah,
I got to see.
Everybody tells me that.
Wow,
appreciate that. Thank you. It's definitely much better half. That's for sure.
And she works for Formula One, so she's a step above you there as well.
Yeah. I know. I'm 7 years into this game, and I guess like professionally, the next year will be my 7th year working professionally in MotoGP, and then beyond that, I think I was grinding away for a good. I would say I was working away 3 years off my own back, actually using my student loan to fund me going to races and renting cameras. For 3 years before that, so I'm like 10 years into this. She's 1 year and working for Formula One. Well, like in Formula One, not at the actual promoter, but like working in Formula One stuff. So that's pretty cool. Eh?
Yeah, she's at the big show.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's take a look at this for a second. How did you get to where you are? As far as how does one get started in that these days?
Well, being young and not asking for very much money helps everybody.
That helps.
Yeah, that is number one. If you and it's sort of having at the time, so I just finished university, so 50 grand student loan. Had applied for a lifeguarding job, got rejected from it, and then also applied to be an events manager executive at Brands Hatch for and I think they were advertising. I don't know how it wasn't much, it wasn't really a living wage. I got rejected from that as well. We got a rejection letter. I actually got a rejection letter from that as I got accepted from Dorna. So I was co-running with a few people a blog on Twitter called Paddock Chatter. I think it's under a different name now, but we had 25,000 Twitter followers at one point. We took this over from a guy called Tim Teal who created it maybe 2010, and I was working on it with a few people who I've named in. I've done a couple of other podcasts and spoken about this a little bit before, so I won't bore everybody with details again. but there was a good 6 of us behind that, over time. 2011 to 2015, I was sort of most active on the Paddock Chatter blog, along with a few other people, including Neil Morrison. Actually, my co-commentator wrote for the blog a couple of times whilst he was trying to make waves in the industry. And because it had a bit of a following, MotoGP invited us along to Silverstone to basically do some social media, some tweets and Instagram posts about the event to promote their new campaign with Motul Oils, the MotoGP Buzz project, which then essentially turned into now the Motul Superfan project. So I got invited to that. I was the one available, went to it. The guy who was taking me around asked what I was doing. I just finished university. He said, would you like to move to Barcelona and work in MotoGP? And there you go. Ticket, off you go.
Wow.
So I started as a social media editor in MotoGP. So I was the one in 2016. I was the person posting on the Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook channels, all me. I wasn't creating the videos and stuff. I was like a whole web team and video production team working on that, but I was the one doing the posting as my first job in Dorna.
Wow.
Matt, did you work with, or do you know Dylan Gray?
Yeah, so I worked with Dylan. So I worked with Dylan whilst I was working in the office 2016, 2017 in Barcelona. He was, he was a bit of a superstar to me. I'm not afraid of being that. Like, oh my gosh, it's Dylan Gray. Like, I've known of him for a few years by that point. And also we went to the same college. How random is that?
Oh, wow.
Me and Dylan. Yeah. So so I would see him as he would come back from the races, and then when he announced he left, he told me just after he had went and told the bosses, and he said to me, like, Matt, you like, I think you got something, you got a good bit of talent, you're funny, whatever, go, and if you want a job traveling in the paddock, not just posting on social media, I don't know what your ambitions are, but if you want something, he was telling me this in Valencia, go and tell the bosses now what you want, and that you want to travel and you want to do things and see if you can fit in, go and do it. So I'd marched right over to my then boss, Mikhail Morel's office, and I was like, hello, Dylan's just told me he's leaving. He also told me that I should come and pitch myself for a job at the circuit with you guys. What have you got for me? And he was like, interesting, I'll get back to you. And there we have it, Moto2, Moto3 commentator, basically.
That was it, huh? That's what did it.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, I'd done a couple of video voiceovers. I was doing this one called Missing the Apex, it was called, which is like this kind of Mickey taking piss. Can we swear on this one? Piss taking?
Yeah,
do you have to bleep that? Piss taking video about stuff, but it was fairly nice. I did that after every GP for 2 years, I think. 2 years, 1 year, and so they were like, oh, okay, so you can speak on camera, that's fine. And then doing Twitter tweets throughout a race, that is a form of commentary. It's no coincidence that actually two of the main guys who do the Twitter for MotoGP now, Lewis Sotheby and Jack Gorst, they're also very good commentators. They're quality. Lewis was presenting after the flag from the test. He also does some FIM Sev from Repsol, going to be called the Junior GP next year, and so does Jack Gorst. He does the esports commentary. They're great because it's the same skill set. Right. So that's how the bosses deemed, Matt should be quite good. We'll stick him with Neil Morrison. I don't know how his story came about. You guys will have to interview him. And there we were, absolutely sweating one out in Qatar because we were so nervous. Round 1, FP1.
So you know the situation about how everything went with Dylan Gray then when he was going to be with us and then he wasn't. Yeah. Now he's, I think, in Canada with Terry and
beautiful wife. Baby.
Yeah, it's just crazy how everything changed with him. And, we came so close to having him with us, and he was doing a lot of research. He was contacting all the riders, and it's just a shame how things went because we were looking forward to having him with us. That's for sure.
Yeah. Dylan's absolute class. I don't think there's very few people who have in the last 10 years in terms of this media space who have been as dedicated as Dylan Gray is. And him and, well, anyone who steps into that pit lane role is absolutely dedicated as it gets. Him and now obviously Simon Crafar taken over from him. Simon is equally just as dedicated to finding out anything and everything they can, about this sport. And it's awesome. I have so much admiration. I could never do that job. I mean, geez, that's wild.
I think that is one of the hardest jobs there.
Yeah.
When you've got to go talk to somebody that doesn't necessarily want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you had to do it on
that's
air,
probably
and
me
you're
and
doing it live. And I know Simon, you know, he was under a lot of heat there early in his when he took that job, but the improvements that he's made, and now I think, you know, everybody loves him. So it's
oh
just
yeah.
to show that if you stick with it and do your work.
There was a class, an absolute class thread on Reddit last year at some point, which basically just like was about 200 odd people, I think, in the end. All basically, someone started it. It was like Simon Crafar is like, I can't believe how amazingly Simon Crafar has improved from what they deemed he was before
Right.
at the start. And he had like 200 people underneath it all commenting like, oh my gosh, Simon is absolutely phenomenal. And some people are saying, yeah, I didn't like him at first, but now I can't imagine life in MotoGP without him. He's fantastic. And I almost brought a tear to my eye because I know how hard he worked to do that. Like I think he did a bit of media training and stuff. But his commitment, there was no question of his commitment anyways. You're just thrown into the lion's den. You know, it's like we will probably talk about later on in terms of like Cam coming over to Moto2. Does it,
Right.
it just, you know, Simon Crafar was thrown into the lion's den as well. That's a tough job, much like Steve Day was thrown into lion's den, taken over from Nick Harris. You know, Nick Harris, such a stalwart of the
Right.
paddock after he retired, and also me to an extent. You know, I jump in, I'm something completely different. I had no commentary training, or anything like that. I tried to be myself whilst talking, and there are a lot of people which don't like that, and they will tell you about that, and it's unfortunate that I don't really care.
Yeah, it's not for
You know?
the thin-skinned, is it?
No, exactly. I maintain a rule, and I hope, I don't know about the others necessarily, but I just maintain a rule that if the guys who are paying my wages and helping me do this like it, then to hell with everybody else.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Sean and I, that's why we don't do it, because man, we have thin skin over
Oh,
here.
very.
It's
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
transparent. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
If we read one bad comment, we're like, that's it, we're done. We're not doing it anymore. We don't
Actually,
need
no,
this shit.
yeah, no, I get it. It's so fun. Like I love, mate. I get the whole range of comments on our podcast that we done the last couple of years, like Poindexter, everyone calls me. Like I've seen that used like 5 times. And I'm like, yep, no worries. Cheers, mate. So yeah, it's pretty brutal out there. So I mean, yeah, I just want to say like massive respect to Simon for like sticking with it and being just as awesome as he's first and foremost one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life, both in terms of entertainment value, and also what he does for his friends. I love him to bits. And then secondly, his grind and how hard he works, and he wants to conquer that. He's put as much effort into this as he would have done in his racing career. I'm absolutely sure of it.
That's right, and that's why he won a Grand Prix.
Hell yeah.
I was going to say, Matt and Paul, that's Simon Crafar is actually kind of a hero of mine because of that win he had that Red Bull 500 back in the day there. I mean, in fact, there was one time where I think he posted and I actually commented on it, and he commented back, which I was like, oh my gosh, Simon Crafar actually said something to me. But I wanted to mention about Simon. It's similar in our situation, Matt, with our one of our commentators on our MotoAmerica Live Plus streaming service, Roger Hayden. He was well liked from the beginning and continues to be, but that guy, oh my gosh, he does his homework so much, and he's improved a lot, and he knows he has, but it was an untapped resource with him because he's known to be such kind of a quiet guy who speaks more with facial expressions than he does with his voice. Well, now he's just tremendous on broadcasts, and we're just thrilled to have him.
No, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, like I think it's funny because just because you're an ex-athlete doesn't mean you are going to be great at talking about your sport in the media landscape. That's not a given. I love it when people say to me like, what experience have you got in racing? You have no right. It's like, mate, just because you don't have experience in racing doesn't mean you can't talk about it. And also, just because you are an ex-racer or an ex-athlete in any sport doesn't mean you're instantly way better than someone who's never done it of talking about it. You know, it doesn't. So to be an ex-rider and to actually be good in that media landscape, you got to tip your hat to anybody who could do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not a lot of them, or none of us would have jobs.
Yeah, thank God, right?
I'd have to go race or something.
I know. I'd have to. Well, but I've always said if I ever got like booted off from MotoGP, I'd go be a landscape gardener. Yeah, spend time outside,
There you
stay
go.
fit, and also I hear that it's also creative, and also I hear you get paid quite well in that. So that's my post MotoGP job. Or as my other half says, whenever we don't at the moment because COVID and pandemic and all that, but whenever we used to go visit places like we went to Edinburgh Zoo on one of our first weekends together. There was a guy stood in the queue of like the ticket line entertaining people. She just pointed to me. I was like, "That's your post-Dorna job."
There you go.
So,
A retirement job.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's talk a little bit about motorcycle racing, shall we?
Yeah, do it.
We have Joe Roberts now and Cameron Beaubier in Moto2, and you spend a good part of your life talking about Moto2, obviously. What like if you're okay, we already know what Joe's capable of because he's had moments of brilliance. Cameron came in as a 5-time MotoAmerica Superbike champion. Or I don't even know if you would know this, but how did people feel about him, like people that were racing with him? Because I've told him, I'm like, look, just stick with it. And those who know, and what you have will shine through eventually. You've just got to be patient. But what did they think about this guy? Or if you're a Spanish kid in Moto2, you don't care or don't know about Cameron Beaubier?
So from non-riders perspective, spoke to quite a lot of people about him, spoke to journalists who then spoke to people about him. I think it was, it's Giacomo Guidotti. No, was it? Francesco Guidotti, who was the Pramac racing team manager. And he is now going to KTM to replace Mike Leitner.
Right.
He worked with Cam in KTM when he was in 125cc alongside Marquez.
Oh, wow.
And when he heard that Cam was coming over, again, he was like, you friggin' watch, everybody. This guy is special. And what I found is a lot of the MotoGP paddock, the mechanics, engineers and people, a lot of them have been there for decades. Like it's the same people. Like you guys would know this already. Like I'm sure it's pretty similar in MotoAmerica. Some of the guys who are there in the big teams have probably been there for years and years and years, right?
Right.
So people who were there when Cam was over before in 125cc, they knew how good he was. Engineers talk to each other. They look at the data. They saw what he was able to do on a bike. I know Cam is quite self-confessed in that he didn't quite have at 16 years old. He wouldn't say he had his eye on the ball as much as he perhaps should have with that opportunity he was given. I think that's fair to say. I think that's what he was talking about in the first interview I did with him this year. But everybody from the engineering side and team side who heard he was coming over were like, this is going to be good. Like, might not get it first year, but this will be good. That's the impression I got. As far as riders are concerned, I'm not quite sure because they're just like, well, you mentioned it. It's like no one knows. A lot of these young riders, they don't know the history of the sport, like anything beyond the last 5 years.
Right.
Actually, some of them didn't even really know sort of who he was, but they would have heard 5-time MotoAmerica Superbike champion, and from what I gather, a few of them, they were like, "This will be interesting to see what he does." You know, none of them was writing him off. I know that much that I spoke to, but they all think. But the ones who would comment on it were like, "This is going to be interesting to see what he does."
Yeah, I was curious to see, like, like a Lowe's, for example, who's been there for a while, and he's been one of those guys that's been in Moto2, and I think he might even be a little bit older than Cam. But
I think he is. Yeah, he's like 30 now.
Yeah, you just wonder what it's like when those guys ride together. If they're, you're probably right. They probably don't give a lot of thought to each other, to be honest.
I bet he did when it was like in the US and stuff, and Cam was up there, and then the Algarve GP when Cam was in that top 5 and that. So
right.
I think it's and I know Rebby was certainly knew Cam was there in Circuit of the Americas because he was like he was getting really cheesed off that
Cameron felt bad about that.
Yeah, because I think it was Cam said he was like, I felt bad because I was riding like I do normally for like the top 10, but I was up the front, and you don't ride like that up the front necessarily. Like people, because they're just taking chunks out of each other a bit further back. Cam would say at the back, and it's like, dude, you are not at the back. Shush. But yeah. So I think they certainly know when he's there on track. That's for sure.
Hey, Matt, I had a question for Cameron that I did not ask him because I just couldn't bring myself to ask him, I think, or I wasn't sure about what he would even say because it's related to team chemistry a little bit. And maybe you can respond to this. I got the impression that change of crew chief early on, like I thought he got along well with that first crew chief that he had. And I mean, I think he really thinks a lot of Stuart Shetton, and why wouldn't he? But this first guy that he had, I thought he was really good within the team, but then there was something going on with chemistry of that team that hadn't, to my impression, had nothing to do with Cam. And did you think that affected him at all during the year when he lost that first crew chief?
Interesting. That's interesting. I'm not sure, to be honest, because so it was what, after Portugal, I think it was something like that. And yeah, he did have yes, I would say yes and no. Because like actually he crashed in Jerez, and then Le Mans, he nearly had one of his best finishes of the year in the top 6. And okay, it was kind of a weird race, things like that. And then Mugello. So it might have, for a race or two, just whilst you're literally, hello, new person that I've not met before. Obviously, John Hopkins knows Stuart Shenton super well. I'm not sure how much the listeners of the show would know Stuart Shenton. But obviously, like crew chief previously to likes of Kevin Schwantz, who like other sort of, and John Hopkins, so other like American motorcycling legends. Really well thought of. He had been out the game for a period of time. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he'd never been a crew chief in Moto2 before. So I think it's probably fair to say, like, yeah, there would have been an adjustment period. But for Cam, like very early into that new relationship, he got 2 of his best results of the year, a near 6th, which would have been if he didn't make that mistake at turn 3 in Le Mans, but so did about 100 other guys that weekend. So you got forgiven for that. And then Mugello coming through from probably one of the rides of the season, 26th on the grid through the 8th by the end. Like, unbelievable ride.
Yeah, I mean, it really did come out. It really did turn around towards the end. So I just wasn't sure if in the beginning anything happened with that. You know, this sounds like I'm name dropping or big time in here, but Paul and I just recently went to Cameron's wedding. We were in Roseville, California, where he lives, and so we were there. And
I got a question about that wedding, by the way, when we do it. So like, we'll carry on. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. So, you know, our table, we had a good table. We were pretty close to where they were at, but next door to our table, Eitan Butbull was there along with Bob Moore, Cameron's agent. And, you know, I know Paul talked to Eitan a little bit, and I did too. And one of the things I said to him, and I think you can appreciate this because this is in no way disparaging Marcos Ramirez in any way, shape, or form. But, you know, personally, and I know for our country, and I think Paul feels the same way, now that Sean Dillon Kelly is going to be his teammate and it's truly the American racing team, it's just going to be so absolutely fantastic to have those 2 American riders together. I mean, it truly does live up to its name, even though obviously Eitan is living, you know, he's not a Native American, but lives in our country now. It's a big thing for us, and I'm sure you can appreciate that, right?
Oh yeah, hugely. Like that's a big deal, especially that I've really come to realize. So I didn't ask Cam too much about Sean, just because got roped up in other things, and then I suddenly realized end of the year I was like, crap, I'm not actually asked Cam what he thinks about Sean coming over. I didn't realize how much he likes Sean and how much Sean idolizes Cam. So it's going to be like a proper little bromance next year with them 2 in the team together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it'll be a bromance until we see. And that was, I'm sorry, Paul, this was a question I was going to ask Matt further away, but since he kind of set it up, I want to ask this. So, you know, we asked Garrett Gerloff this. So Sean Dillon Kelly's coming off a middleweight bike, obviously not a Moto2 bike, but a super sport bike in our series, and fewer electronics, just like the Moto2 bike. He hasn't had to forget all of that stuff on super bikes that Cameron did. And I'm not trying to doubt Cameron at all, because his second year is going to be pretty cool. But do you think Sean has an advantage coming in from super sport directly into Moto2 at all?
Yeah, I'd say he's, to an extent, he's fresher because he's not going to be as set in his ways in whichever way you decide to interpret that, like be it sort of the riding style techniques that you pick up and are now like a part of your they're innate to you, you know, they're unconscious things that you do on the motorcycle, and then also, you know, it's just he's younger than Cam, which does have an effect as well. I think he'll be fresher coming in. There's obviously less things to forget, and more things to pick up. The other thing is, like, if you look at Cam's riding style, compared to Sean. So I saw pictures of Sean on the Calex Moto2 already. He's got the elbow down solid and has done already on the Supersport bike, whereas Cameron was a lot more of a classic superbike rider style, wasn't he? So, but you know, sure. I hope. Well, having spoken to Sean off camera and on camera a couple of times with a couple of interviews, I'm sure he will. But I hope he still remembers, like, this is your first year, mate. Welcome to the Lion's Den. Don't get ahead of yourself and beat yourself down by expecting too much to begin with, because you never know. He could be an advantage, but it's fine if he's not. He's super young. He's there. He's got the support from the team and also his teammate in that case as well, eh?
Yeah, and in a way, if you're smart enough about it, there's more pressure on someone like Cameron, not because of the Superbike championships or anything like that, but the fact that he's older, because you don't feel like you have the time, right? And somebody like Sean Dillon Kelly, I mean, take your time, kid. You'll be fine. You could do this for 4 or 5 years, and you'd be young.
Mate, I still think the same thing applies to Joe Roberts.
Oh, I took totally.
Like Joe's 24, and Joe likes to say, he said to me a few times, or whatever, it was his birthday at Silverstone. I was like, happy birthday, dude. And he's like, I know, 24, getting old. Everybody around my age does that. Like, I'm one of the only people around me in my sort of circle of friends, like friends in sort of the industry, and then private friends who don't know anything about bikes. I'm one of the only people who says we're 27, we're super young. All my friends around me think life's over. I'm like, are you kidding? And it applies even more for motorcycle races. Like, I hate this. Well, a couple of things actually I want to pick up. We'll talk about later or whatever if we have time. But a couple of things which really grate on me. I hate the rush of the young guys in Grand Prix and probably racing throughout, maybe probably even superbikes as well. I hate it. Like, give guys, I really want Cam to do super well, because he can show people, like, you don't need an 18, 19-year-old. Let them grow into human beings first. Like, there are ones who are prodigies, Pedro Acosta, whatever, who are so good. They're aliens. They're freaks. We can't use aliens anymore because it's not Casey, Jorge, Danny, or Rossi, but we can call them. Why don't we call them freaks instead, right? Because that's what Acosta is. Like, okay, allow him to go, but let's not rush anybody else. Second thing, which you said earlier about with Simon Crafar winning a Grand Prix, Sean, I think that's something which needs to be put on a pedestal a little bit more. Simply winning a race. If you could win a race at MotoGP level, that is that right there. Not everybody can be world champion, and not everybody should be world champion, because it's the top level of motorbike racing. So that's two things I'm quite passionate about. But back to that, I think, like, Joe he's still very young. Like, it's not imperative. And people might think he is. I don't know whether it's like sponsors or himself. Maybe some MotoGP teams might think that, but I don't really agree. I think he's still very young. Sean is incredibly young. He's basically a baby. And I think Cam's still good. Like, there is nothing wrong with being 28 years old riding in Moto2. I think he's definitely still got a shot at MotoGP. And I know a couple of journalists that I'm friends with don't agree with that. They think he's a bit too old. And I'm like, no. Like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? The headlines, like, 5-time MotoAmerica Superbike champion is now a MotoGP rider. It's gold.
Yeah, right. And I think, and you probably agree, I mean, he'd do so much better on a MotoGP bike than he would on a Moto2 bike because of the things we talked about before, the electronics and not having to change his riding style, and, you know, bigger, more powerful bike is just more what he's used to. So I think if he ever got that opportunity, he'd really be able to show some people, and hopefully, you know, he keeps plugging away at it and things get better in Moto2, he might get that chance. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I think like we talk about it as well, like all the Americans at the world level now, they're all there because they're just as good as everybody else, and they all have the potential to be MotoGP riders. Like, I don't believe that every single rider who is in the Moto3 and Moto2 World Championships could be a MotoGP rider someday. There are some guys who you should not get that opportunity because you will hurt yourself, young fella. Right. But I truly believe all of the guys who are in the World Championships now have the potential to be MotoGP riders someday.
Now, don't you think the new age limits that they're bringing in, I think that's good for several reasons, but one of them is something that you touched on. I think it might give people a little more patience and not feel like they've got to set the world on fire when they're 15 years old.
Yeah, I'm so all for it, and I don't just say that because the people who make those decisions pay my bills. I'm so on board with it. It's like the pressure at the moment, especially with social media as well. It's wild. Like the pressure on, and some people will say to me, have said to me when I've had this conversation with them, it's always been that way. And I'm sure it has to a certain extent, but I do think there is something in that added pressure of your Netflixes with all these documentaries about these sporting greats and these sporting stories, and then also social media and YouTube. It's so the golden ticket is always in your face, and I feel that brings another level of pressure for these guys, and it's on them from such a young age. This sort of change in age limits will have an effect. It won't happen instantly, but I think there'll be like a lag in the effect that it'll push people back. We'll see your next Pedro Acosta will appear potentially in the Moto3 World Championship at 17, 18 years old, like late 17 years old, not just 16 or 15, which the current rule has been. If you're a Red Bull Rookies or Moto3 Junior World Champion, if you won either of those series and you're 15, you can go into the World Championship. But that, I think, will not be the case going forward with these rule changes, which can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, Kenny Roberts may not have got the chance to go Grand Prix racing based on his age if it was today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like,
exactly.
And that's a guy that won 3 world championships,
Exactly. It's all about the whole combination of whether you get to kind of darting around a little bit, but the potential and the actual deal to go to MotoGP is always a whole range of circumstances all coming together. Right. There's no direct line into MotoGP. It's impossible. Look at Fabio Quartararo.
Exactly.
So I hope though for the American sake, like those guys, because I've got to know Joe first, and then Cam and Sean this year. I don't know Garrett, but they all seem such good guys. I hope the circumstances align for them correctly.
Okay, now I want to go back to what your wedding question was.
Go on. Oh yeah. So I saw someone. Well, me and my other half were flicking through the Instagram stories. So there was a broken window. What happened there?
Yeah, I pushed Sean through it. It was weird. I didn't actually see it till after it happened, but I think it wasn't much. Somebody like touched it and it broke, didn't they, Sean?
Okay.
Well, yeah, or it was one of the riders. Let me put it that way. And there were quite a few riders that were at that wedding. I mean, Jake Gagne was there, and Matthew Skoltz, and a whole bunch of our guys were there. And yeah, so one of them did something. Cam Peterson, I don't know. I'm not sure which one, but
he's South African, isn't he? Cam Peterson.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that him? Yeah. Well, they're always causing trouble, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, if there's a broken window around in a South African, I'm going to go ahead and say it was him.
Excellent. But it was good fun though, was it? It looked a good event. I enjoyed the video of Cam coming out with Shelby with a beer bottle in his hand already.
Yeah, he's got the beer bottle.
Yeah, it was good. And the funny part is about that window was his new father-in-law was a little freaked out about it because there was obviously thoughts that somebody was going to have to pay. And of course I think he was kind of putting it on Cameron, and Cameron, like most riders, they have the first nickel they've ever made somewhere lodged in their somewhere. But so the next day I went to Cameron's house. I'd never seen his place, and we had some time to kill before going to the airport. So we stopped by there to see his place. And the father-in-law, we were out in the shed where all the bikes are, and the father-in-law came out and said, man, Cameron, I just got some really bad news from the wedding venue. And Cameron, I could see his face like drain of color. And he said that window is $12,000. And Cameron's like, you're shitting me. And he said, yes, I was shitting you, because the wedding venue actually paid for the window and got it reinstalled, because they probably had a wedding the next day. So it all ended up well, but it was fun to see Cameron's face when he thought he might have to actually reach into his wallet.
Absolutely, no doubt. Even though as a 5-time MotoAmerica Superbike champion, I bet he's got a bit more dough than the rest of the Moto2 field. He's probably still just as tight as the rest of them, eh?
Oh yeah,
You don't see him rolling around in any flash cars like some of those youngsters do, right?
Right, and he's not quite Garrett Gerloff level,
right?
because Garrett told me one time when he went to Europe a couple years ago to check out some racing and just kind of get his name out there. He told me about an Airbnb that he found that he stayed in, and it was something ridiculous like $30 a night. And I'm like, that's not possible. I said, there's no way you found a place for $30 a night. And he goes, no, $30 a night. And I said, well, what was the situation? He said, well, I didn't have the whole place to myself. I had this couch, and then there was a couple in the bedroom, and they didn't speak English or Spanish, and I couldn't. So he said, we just communicated with each other by looking at our phones. And I said, you slept on these people's couch? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that's why it was $20.
That is unreal.
For him, that was a great find because he didn't have to spend, $100.
Yeah, I bet. Well, the one thing Cam living in outside of, he loves it when I say he lives in Sitges. One thing he's got to be careful of if and when he moves out of his place. The landlords like to keep your deposit in Spain, and you ain't got any renters' rights. I've lost over 3,000 euros of deposits from landlords who are just like, oh, this is wrong, and you ain't got a leg to stand on. So if he's a man who doesn't like to part with his money, he's got to be careful with that. Make sure that place is tip top before he leaves.
Well, I saw his place and it looks nice. I saw it on the new show you guys did, the Behind the Stars and Stripes, and
yeah,
it looks like he's got a nice little setup.
Not bad, right? I didn't get to go. Jack Gorst, who I talked about earlier, the esports commentator, he got to go because he lives in Spain and stuff. So, but yeah, they had a great time. Thought it was pretty. He came back. He was like, Cam's place is pretty swanky. I was like, really? Oh, there you go.
I thought the show was really well done, and
you like it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot, and I liked it because I think there's, and again, I would even call myself briefly guilty of that, but it really does show you how hard that class is. And I think that's good for our guys. Of course, Cameron, I saw him at the wedding. I'm like, oh man, this series is going to be good. And he's like, oh, I don't know if I did very well. I don't know. You know how he is, right?
Yeah. Him and Joe, both the same on that front.
And they both come off so well on camera. They look good. They sound good. They say all the right things, but they're funny and you get to see their personality. But I think the show was good because I think it made people realize, like, look, these guys they're good. They just need a little more time. And
that then, mate, that's music to my ears. That's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to do with it, essentially.
Well, that's good. Sean, what else do you got for Matt?
I have two questions. Now, let me just fire them off here. So the first one, Matt, since you're British, I don't know if you know the concept or the idea of throwing up a softball for somebody. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
All right. Well,
I do plenty of those.
Okay. Well, people are gonna think I'm doing that, but I really do want to know. So is Wayne Rainey's dream being fulfilled? Are you seeing, is MotoAmerica putting our riders more on the map over there? I mean, obviously we've got some guys going over, but is there some awareness of MotoAmerica in your realm a little bit, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's with simple correlation of if there are more Americans coming over,
right,
they're good enough to be there. There's no such thing. I hate the comments of people saying, oh, it's a passport gig or whatever, and it's put the token Americans or whatever like that. That doesn't exist anymore. It's the championships are too good for that. If you're not good enough, you're not there. And if they are good enough, it's because Wayne's doing such a great job over back home. Simple answer, right?
I mean, there was a time, I mean, I'm sure you know who Josh Hayes is. He did race, so, Josh, was the one that a lot of people pointed to. His career got a little bit started later and he finally got a superbike ride later. And, but what he did when he raced for Tech 3, I mean, he did a good job. And it just, during that time period, the series wasn't, I guess we didn't have Wayne Rainey. I guess that's part of it. So it was unfortunate for Josh.
Didn't Josh? He topped the warm-up session in Valencia, didn't he?
Yeah, he sure did.
And they were joking. I remember the commentators at the time were saying, like, he's going to print off that PDF and frame it for his house. And I hope he did, because that's awesome. It's not just a warm-up session. It's good for you. That's cracking. So yeah, I can understand that.
I always put a lot of importance on that warm-up session, though. I mean, to me, that's those guys, like, this is what I'm going to be racing today, and this is how fast I can go at race pace.
For some reason, last couple of years, like last year it was because of the calendar difference in times, but for some reason, like last 2 years, warm-ups, me and Neil commentate on the warm-up sessions, and they kind of sucked because like there was one reason, like maybe there was some fog, the temperature of the track surface is so different that every time it was like, well, ladies and gents, this is going to be a pretty useless session. So we're just going to do a recap of the weekend.
Right.
But yeah, previously they're pretty good. They're pretty indicative of what's going on, aren't they? But
yeah, it's almost like if a guy was fifth in warm up, he was going to finish about fifth in the race.
Exactly. But now it's kind of a strange one, isn't it?
All right, Sean, you got one more.
Yeah, the other one I've got. So this relates to kind of the paddock in general, and it's kind of wondering if comparing notes between you, Matt, and what we do over here. I'll give you an example of this week because it's Christmas week. I'm doing this story about this sort of quote gift exchange between the riders. So I divided all of them up and let them know, hey, you drew so and so's name. What would you get them for Christmas? And obviously the idea is you can get back at them, right? And kind of have gag gifts or whatever. And I'm doing a story on it. But as is the case with everything that we do, especially with our superbike riders, there are some riders that are just more than willing to help, and some that just aren't. I mean, they're riders, right? They're not normal people, but plus it's sometimes hard to get them to participate. And I've talked to Michael Hill about this before with regard to World Superbike too. And, he talks about how within World Superbike, they have sanctions if they don't get involved. Do you struggle dealing with riders, sometimes getting them to do an interview or talk to you or get some information from them?
I would say get information from them is the most difficult. This is why I really enjoyed. This is kind of why, like, I really pushed to do the project of doing a series with initially just Joe and then Cam and Joe, because those guys are honest. Getting stuff out of other riders. Oh my God, it's just cliche after cliche. There's a real issue to an extent but it's not just MotoGP, so I hope no one thinks I'm just taking a dump on them, but it's same. It can be quite similar in Formula One and in other sports as well. People are just talking in cliches like, oh yeah, I'm going to be trying my 100%. Well, yeah, of course you are. Like, right. So getting stuff out there is really difficult. But then that is also the game of the interview, isn't it, as well? But other riders, they can, what I find is if you pitch them, you're doing something different with them, and it's kind of cool, like some of the pre-events, the little build-up events, publicity ones. If you're doing something different and cool and giving them a worthwhile experience, like there's a couple of times this year the riders got to teach influencers or YouTubers or famous people how on the Ovale bikes, right? The riders actually really enjoyed it. And they had a good time. But if it's something else, like just come and shake hands with this person, they can be a little bit more like, I'm not really bothered, buddy. And it can be a bit more difficult, should we say? Yeah,
it depends on their fun level.
Yeah. I had so this year two riders who are really good. Well, this is why I enjoyed a podcast, because if you sit a rider down for half an hour, if you can actually negotiate with a press officer to have a rider for half an hour, because normally they're like, no. Because half an hour is such a long time. Sorry, I'm sapping your life away from you. If you actually sit them down and you actually then have a conversation, you talk about memories from their childhood and stuff, they're actually good company and they're actually good guys. Duran Mir is a fantastic example. Me and Fran did my co-host of the podcast. We did an interview with him at Misano 1 for the podcast, half an hour. He was great and he gave us loads. He talked about his struggle and how like the pressure's off now. He's a MotoGP rider to an extent, or every time he feels the pressure, he remembers coming through in the junior series, because when he didn't come from money, so he had to win. He was win or bin, because if he didn't win, he wasn't going to get a ride. Right. And so he's like, every time I have pressure, I remember that. But he only gave me that because it was in a podcast, half an hour talking. I interviewed him when we went to the Williams F1 headquarters and they were meeting the esports guys and like getting a look at the museum. And we do, at the end of every event with Dorna Cameras, if you're there, you do a quick interview with them for like MotoGP.com or for broadcasters, right? So it's real just TV stuff. He was like useless. He was absolutely rubbish. I didn't feel like he enjoyed it at all. Yet actually speaking to him off camera, he clearly did, So they're funny. They're funny. Like for you guys as well, your riders too. Cam is just doing interviews with him this year. as you said, perpetually afraid that he doesn't come across well. And he kept saying, make me look good, please. I even put kind of take the mickey out of him at the end of the whole series. The last line in the series is him walking off camera in stitches and going, I really hope you guys make me look good. So it's just, and also there's a bit in there where he's like, can you tell Matt to just leave the eating part out, just to kind of take the mick of it? And so he was scared of that. And then Joe is fantastic at interviews. I've not heard from him whether he's watched the series or not. Like I hope he hasn't felt like we did right by him. But like, he's great at interviews. He will be totally honest with you and really open up. But my God, he is always late for the interviews.
Yeah, I bet.
So he's just classic, like laid back surfer dude Californian. So
Yeah.
But if that's all I have to worry about with those guys, then we're pretty good, eh?
Yeah, we're training them well over here so they can go over there and you can have it easy, you know?
We're trying anyway.
It's the Carruthers and Bice Media School, that's for sure.
That's right. Free, of course.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, dude. So no, it's great. You brought up two really, really great guys. By the way, well, something well funny, as I was doing a bit of research for old footage of like Joe when he was in Moto2 first year. His accent's turned more American recently. There was this interview I did with him at a test in Mugello 2018. No jokes, he had the most transatlantic accent ever. He actually sounded a little bit like I'm talking to you now. It was really funny because, of course, both his parents are British, right?
Yes.
Right.
But it's funny how his accents change. I didn't know that. Not told him that, actually. I should send him the link and be like, listen to your voice. Hilarious.
Funny. Wow. You think it'd go the other way? That's
I know, right?
Yeah.
All right, boys. Matt, this has been fun and we'll have to do it again, but I appreciate you. Well, you're not staying up too late. What is it? Almost 8 o'clock or something?
Yeah, 8 o'clock. And yeah, I'm going to go and have a gin and tonic before bed.
There you go.
All right, and then make sure you get up in the morning and run because I will see it on our Strava.
Well, it's the thing. Behind the Stars and Stripes killed my training for a whole month. So yeah, I'm trying to get back into it.
Yeah, go ahead and blame America.
Yeah. No, I will do. I'll tell you what. Before we go, I will do a plug. It's on MotoGP.com at the moment, but it will be on MotoGP's YouTube channel sometime in January. I really hope people get to go and watch it, and not because I made it, literally just because the message is that you have 4 great guys. They are good enough. They have shown they're good enough, and I really hope you continue to support them and get behind them even more going forward because they're all great fellas.
Yeah, I watched them as soon as they came out. So well done there. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I think it just really shows that how difficult things are over there, and that these guys will persevere and they'll have success.
Exactly. Even this year's champ had 4 pretty rubbish years. So
one thing I did like to rub in Cameron's face was I got the crash stats, and he crashed 17 times in 2021 and actually made the top 10. So I sent that to him and I just said, brah. And he got back to me and he goes, yeah, it was a really quote unquote fun year. But
same crash, right? Every time.
Yeah. And I don't think he's crazy. I don't think he crashed 17 times in his MotoAmerica career.
That's what he said, right? He would normally crash 3 times a year there. That's max.
That's about it.
Yeah. And it's just like there, it's just, and I told him that early when he started having the crashes. I said, well, other than the fact that it's not fun to do it, don't worry about it, because it's like a badge of honor over there to throw the thing down the road at least, a couple times a weekend, right?
Exactly. I feel sorry for Shelby because like she's never been used to seeing Cam crash so much.
Right.
As hard enough as it is, So Cam's all right. He just gets up, shrugs it off. He's wearing Alpine Stars. He's good.
Yeah. Okay, you two, thank you very much. And both of you have a safe and happy holiday, and we'll talk again soon.
Merry Christmas, fellas.